Welcome back. While some European countries and the U.S. are witnessing exponential explosions in confirmed cases of COVID-19, the situation in Asian countries is becoming relatively stable. So some experts are now saying that since Asia was the first to experience the outbreaks, many government regions have set an example of how to effectively deal with this epidemic. So what experiences can they share with the world? Can those experiences be duplicated in Western cultures effectively? Now, joining me for more discussions are from Shanghai via Skype, Mr. Chen Hong, Executive Director of Asia Pacific Studies Center at East China Normal University, and also via phone in Beijing is Mr. Rong Ying, Vice President of China Institute of International Studies. Great to have you both with us. Let me start with you, Mr. Chen Hong. According to China's National Health Commission, only 67 confirmed cases were reported in the mainland on Wednesday, and all of them are imported cases. Now, new cases reported in South Korea, Japan, Singapore have also been below 100 every day recently, and that's according to the WHO. Some researchers believe the reason that many Asian countries were able to contain the epidemic is because of their quick and strict measures at a very early stage. Is there an Asian model that other regions can learn from? What do you think?
Well, if we look at and make comparisons among the countries tackling the COVID-19 outbreak, there are some noteworthy features. We could do some research. For example, for most of the countries affected by the virus outbreak, at the initial onset, the very start of the outbreak in the first place, there was a similar abruptness with rapid increase of infected cases and fatalities. The sheer speed of the disease seemed to catch each of the countries by surprise, and they are unprepared. There was an initial lack of promptness of response. However, right after the first onslaught, China, South Korea, Singapore, Japan, almost instantaneously devised reactive measures. Although the measures vary in each country, for most of the East Asian countries, we see a noticeable, decisiveness for the governments and relevant authorities to implement restrictive measures, and the population in general demonstrates compliance. There is a common, I think, understanding for the schemes, and also willingness to forsake some of their personal freedom for the benefits of the collective. This is very different from scenarios in countries such as in Italy, in Australia, where people would be overtly defying the authorities and their restrictive measures. So I think the East Asian model, the Confucianism, of collectivism, is at sway in time of crisis. A life and death crisis, such mindsets can play a critical role, making significant differences to their countries and their people's way of coping with the emergency.
Yeah, this is a stark contrast we're seeing in responses in Asian countries and maybe Western countries. China began a strict lockdown policy after around 30 deaths, together with mass testing and stern quarantine measures. Now, Mr. Rong Ying, let me bring you into the discussion. Other countries that initially allowed the disease to spread, most notably South Korea, also managed to tame the outbreak very fast through rigorous testing and tracing contacts of those infected. Why can these countries manage to take these measures not just swiftly but also effectively? Do you agree with what's being said by Mr. Chen?
Certainly, I think the government plays a very important role, and the competence of and effective of the role by the government, together with, I think, the availability or determination to make sure that to have the rigorous tests, I think that helps makes a big difference. And more importantly, I believe that, remember, these countries, I think China, Japan, and South Korea, and Singapore, they also have learned lessons from what happened. 17 years ago, and I'm talking about the epidemic of SARS. So I think the people, the average people, they still have that memory, and they still, I think, feel that they have to do something to make sure that to make sure that epidemic would not go out of control. So I thought that we may have, that is possibly one of the big important difference between East and West in talking about how they manage this virus this epidemic.
I would also want to talk about the use of face masks. As one of the most visible symbols of the COVID-19 outbreak, face masks have many different associations. Wearing face masks is very common and reasonable for people with Asian or East Asian cultural backgrounds, while in many Western countries 1 or 2 months ago, people could get mocked or even attacked for wearing a face mask. Mr. Chen, how do you interpret the difference? And why, in Western cultures, do so many fear or misunderstand face masks?
I think we might attribute the reluctance to adopt such self-protective measures, such as wearing masks, to cultural differences. But we must remember this is not about a choice between tea or coffee, Chinese baijiu or Scottish whiskey. We are talking about life and death. So bad cultural mindsets, bad habits need to be dropped, and good habits need to be adopted. So in China, for example, we have been making significant changes to our ways of daily life. For example, we're now encouraging people not to eat from the same plates on the dinner table. People can either eat from their own share of the food, like people in the West do, or use a shared pair of chopsticks to pick food from a shared dish. So these are good changes. I don't think that people should be citing individuality and culture as a reason to stick to bad habits like refusing, reluctance, and rejection to wear face masks.
Yeah, because in this epidemic, what you do affects me, what I do affects you, and not wearing face masks can be seen as immoral or selfish here in Asian countries. Mr. Chen, how do you see the role of face masks in containing the spread of COVID-19 and how it's being perceived in Asian cultures and Western cultures?
Masks have been proved to be able to effectively ward off germs, viruses, and other pathogens, both scientifically and also by commonsensically. So in this regard, I would strongly argue the Western media, key opinion leaders and other public figures in the West, they could speak out to encourage people to switch their mindsets and be more willing to wear masks and drop, those unhealthy habits. People, often, hug together, they kiss together. In such a kind of, time of difficulty, I think we need rationality rather than stressing upon differences.
Yeah, and Mr. Rong, so Mr. Chen earlier mentioned this different mindset in people in Asia and people in North America, in Europe. Some analysts have put the cultural differences behind the different actions by Eastern and Western governments. In Asian countries, especially East Asian cultures, Chinese, Japanese, Korean culture, there is a sense of collectivism. So the group is an important part of the culture, so people are willing to sacrifice their own comfort for the greater good, for the good of others. Yet in Western cultures, individualism prevails. Is that why strict policies like lockdowns were accepted by some Asian countries but criticized in the West, at least initially?
Well, indeed, that the responses of general public towards lockdown, it seems that there are differences towards that. But I don't see that a huge difference as per se, because as we have seen what is happening in Europe and others, now more and more people are realizing the importance or the need to have such kind of lockdown, even though it is still very difficult to some extent to implement as effectively as though that in China. I would like to come back a little bit about the face mask, because it is to understand that we need possibly will take there's a big difference between having the mask. The purpose of that, the face mask, is it to protect yourself or protect the others. In the case of Japan, for Japanese, you will find that a lot of people, you will run into more Japanese wearing a face mask. This is not meant to protect himself or herself, rather to protect the others. Exactly. So this is a huge difference. It's a kind of certainly very much related to the Japanese culture that they would not like to create trouble to others. And an extension, I think, the understanding for that is understanding that point is also very much important.
Right. An expert also say the challenge faced by many Western governments is whether and when to act on a health threat. If you act swiftly and the outbreak isn't as bad as feared, then the government gets criticized for overreacting. And if you adopt a wait and see approach and move too slowly, then the government gets criticized for underreacting. Do you agree with that, Mr. Chen?
Well, I believe you can't please everyone. When governments handle an existential crisis like this one, the aim is not to please people, to make people happy. So in time of crisis, people look to the government for leadership, for solution, and therefore we need resoluteness. Hesitancy, diffidence would only result in more losses of life and economic costs. I think the Chinese leadership put it very right. It is a people's war. So this is not a drill. This is not a computer simulation, or in Chinese we say warfare on paper. But actually, this is a real war concerning tens of thousands of human lives. So I believe to stop this virus from further ravaging the world, governments around the world should stop being preoccupied with public opinions, but concentrate more on stopping the virus.
I want to also touch on big data very quickly. We should note the role of big data here. Across China, visitors to office buildings, residential compounds have to register their names, contact information, ID numbers, travel history in order to feed into a police database. Mr. Rong Ying, people in some cities must register phone numbers now with an app in order to take public transportation. I mean, how do you see this, the balance between privacy and public health and civic duty?
Indeed, it is not only a balance. I think both the government and the average people have to strike. It is also a kind of a trade-off, kind of a sort of a sacrifice, and a government or the average people have to accept whether you would like to have that privacy for the sake of your health, or whether you want to help public health and for the privacy. I think for me, what is important is how it is going to be done. For example, I think now we are talking a lot about the adoption of emergency laws. Others would, I think, even in the case of the West, Europe and the United States, as very much going to sacrifice or undermine the so-called privacy. So here, this is indeed a big cultural or political differences for that. But I think we are talking about a very serious virus, very serious pandemic. I think possibly it is the right time now we can take a different look about the privacy.
Right, well said. Thank you very much. We had to leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Chen Hong, Executive Director of Asia Pacific Studies Center at East China Normal University, and Mr. Rong Ying, Vice President of China Institute of International Studies, joining us on the phone. And that's going to do it for this edition of The Point. As always, follow us on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the CGTN app to watch our show, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thank you for watching. You've got The Point.